All right, ready to dive in. We're taking a close look at Indian Bank's Q2 FY25 performance. You've given us a really interesting mix here.
Yeah.
The press release with all the numbers, of course,
Yeah.
a presentation deck sort of highlighting the main points,
Mhm.
and a list of questions that really got me thinking about some of the implications of this.
It is a smart combination.
Yeah.
Gives us a pretty good view, I think, of what's actually going on with this bank.
Exactly. That's what we're
Yeah.
here for, to kind of cut through all the noise and figure out what's really going on.
Yeah.
So how is Indian Bank actually doing? What are the things that maybe we should be concerned about or excited about?
For you, the listener.
For you, the listener, what's it all mean? So let's start with the headline news here.
Yeah.
Indian Bank is reporting a 36% jump in net profit for Q2,
Wow.
hitting 2,707 crores. Pretty impressive, especially when you consider the kind of global economic climate right now.
It is impressive, especially when you think about a lot of the other banks. Are they going to be able to keep that kind of profitability up?
Yeah, that's a great point.
With the way interest rates are, all the global uncertainty, it definitely suggests that Indian Bank may be doing something different.
Okay.
That helps them be a little bit more resilient to that.
So what is that? What's their secret?
Well, one big factor is the growth that they've had in their net interest income. That's the meat and potatoes of banking. It's the difference between what they earn on their loans and what they have to shell out on deposits.
Right.
And they saw an 8% jump year on year,
Wow.
reaching 6,194 crore. And that's a really good indicator that they're actively lending.
Yeah.
And that they're seeing some really strong returns from those loans.
So that makes sense, right? Lending is the business that they're in, but it can also be pretty risky if you're not careful about who you're lending to, right?
Right.
So what does their loan portfolio look like? Are they focusing on any particular sectors?
They are. The presentation actually highlights a really strong focus on what they're calling the RAM segment.
A RAM segment.
Yeah. Retail, agriculture, and MSME. Now, these are considered to be kind of a little less volatile than lending to large corporations.
Right.
It's also a huge market, especially with the way that the rural areas are growing. There's a lot of opportunity there.
Interesting. So they're diversifying, spreading out that risk. But hold on, didn't you say earlier that, like, agriculture, that's susceptible to all sorts of external factors?
Absolutely.
Bad weather,
Totally. Weather, commodity prices.
commodity prices.
Yeah, all kinds of things.
So how are they managing that?
Well, that is where their asset quality management really comes in. And this is one of the most impressive things that I saw in the report.
Really?
The gross non-performing assets ratio, the GNPA, is down to 3.48%, 149 basis points lower than it was last year. That's a massive, massive improvement.
Wow. That is impressive. So it sounds like they're really cracking down on bad loans and making sure that their lending practices are really solid.
Exactly.
But let's be honest, traditional banking isn't really known for being super cutting edge.
No.
So what are they doing on the tech front? Are they embracing technology, or are they kind of stuck in the old ways?
This is actually where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Indian Bank is pushing hard toward digitalization.
Hmm.
They are seeing a huge growth in their digital home loan dispersals, 20x year on year.
What?
Yeah. And their digital vehicle loans have gone up 54x.
Okay, that's not just growth, that's a digital explosion.
Right. It's massive.
So what's driving that? Is it just fancy marketing, or are they actually doing something different?
It seems like it's kind of a combination of things.
Okay.
They've put a lot of effort into building a really user-friendly digital banking platform.
Right.
So a lot of services are available online through a mobile app.
Yeah.
And they're working with a lot of these fintech companies.
So they're collaborating.
Which lets them use the latest technologies. Right. And offer much more specialized products.
Yeah, very smart. So it sounds like they're combining, traditional banking strengths with a really forward-thinking digital strategy.
Yeah.
But what about the human element here? We've talked numbers, we've talked tech, but how are they approaching things like financial inclusion, social responsibility? Are they addressing those things?
They are actually doing quite a bit in that area.
Okay.
They've seen a 19% growth year on year in their PMJDY accounts. Now, this is a government scheme that's really aimed at bringing banking to everyone, especially people who have been excluded in the past.
Right.
They're also pushing for wider adoption of insurance through these schemes like PMJJBY, PMSBY, which offer life insurance, accident insurance to a really wide swath of the
So
population.
they're not just focused on profits, they're trying to make a positive social impact as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get back to the financial side for a second. Their presentation mentions a couple of key financial ratios, ROA and ROE. What do those tell us? And I guess more importantly, how do they stack up against other banks?
Their return on assets, ROA, it sits at like an annualized 1.33%,
Okay.
which is, not bad. It tells you how well they're using their assets to make money. But their return on equity, their ROE, is very impressive, 21.04%.
Wow.
Now, that shows how much profit they're generating compared to the shareholder equity. And if you look at the average for Indian banks, it's around 14%. So they're doing significantly better than a lot of the other players out there.
21%. That's something that investors are definitely going to be paying attention to. But before we get too carried away with all the good news, what about the risks? What about the challenges? What are some of the things that could potentially derail Indian Bank's success story?
Well, the global economy is still pretty shaky.
Right.
Inflation, interest rates, geopolitical uncertainty, all that could have an impact on how they do.
Right.
Plus, the banking sector in India is getting more and more
Yeah.
competitive.
Right. New players.
New players all the time.
Existing players are upping their game.
Absolutely. So they can't just sit back and relax.
No, they got to keep innovating to maintain that edge.
Exactly.
But, before we dive into those challenges, let's take a little bit of a closer look at their loan portfolio, shall we? We talked about this focus on the RAM segment.
Yeah.
But what about the specifics? What types of loans are they actually giving out within those segments? And how are they managing risk in those particular areas?
That's a great place to pick up in the next part of our deep dive. All right. Well, stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break.
Okay, so we've seen that Indian Bank is posting some really good numbers. But let's get into the details of their loan portfolio. What's the split between, retail, agriculture, MSME? Are there any red flags that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, their presentation lays it out pretty clearly. They're really focused on this RAM segment,
Right.
which actually makes up a pretty significant portion of their lending, 63.32% of their domestic advances.
Wow.
And within that, retail is the biggest chunk, followed by agriculture and then MSME. But what's really interesting is they're not just kind of throwing money at these different sectors, willy-nilly.
Right.
They seem to be taking a very measured approach to managing the risk.
Okay, so how are they doing that? How are they making sure that these loans are actually being repaid?
Well, one of the key ways to look at that is how well they're doing in managing the non-performing assets.
The NPAs.
Exactly. In each of these segments, right?
Mm-hmm.
The lower that NPA ratio is, the better they're doing at making sure that those loans are actually being paid back.
Right.
And the numbers are actually pretty encouraging.
Okay, so let's take it sector by sector then.
Oh.
Let's start with retail. What's the story there?
So retail actually boasts the lowest gross NPA percentage at 1.84%,
Wow. Okay.
which suggests that they are doing a really, really good job of assessing the risk in this segment. And, home loans, which are a big part of that retail portfolio, those also have a pretty low GNPA percentage, 1.56%.
So people are paying their mortgages. That's a good sign.
Yeah, it is.
What about agriculture? We know it's a huge sector for India, but it's also got those inherent risks that we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. You're always going to have those things with agriculture that are, completely outside the bank's control.
Right. Weather.
Weather,
Prices.
commodity prices, yep. And so while their GNPA for agriculture has come down this quarter to 6.80%, it is still significantly higher than retail.
Right. That makes sense. It's higher risk by nature.
It is.
But still, 6.80% is a huge improvement.
It's a big improvement.
And that indicates, I guess, that they are getting better at managing those risks. Okay, last but not least, let's talk about MSMEs.
Yeah.
These are small and medium-sized enterprises. They're really the backbone of the Indian economy, and it seems like Indian Bank is making a pretty big bet on their growth, right?
Absolutely. And the numbers actually suggest that that is a smart move.
Okay.
The GNPA ratio for their MSME portfolio is currently at 8.77%, which is down from 12.10% this time last year.
Wow.
So that improvement shows that, their lending practices, their risk management strategies, all of that is starting to become much, much more effective.
So overall, it seems like Indian Bank is doing a pretty good job of managing risk across their entire loan portfolio.
It does.
Their focus on this RAM segment, the careful risk assessment, it seems to be really paying off.
Mm-hmm.
But there's something else that we need to talk about here.
Yeah.
Their commitment to ESG,
Right.
environmental, social, and governance factors. This is becoming increasingly important for investors and customers.
Absolutely. It's a big deal.
And it seems like Indian Bank is really making an effort to incorporate these principles into their operations, right?
Definitely, yeah. Their presentation highlighted quite a few key ESG initiatives,
Mm-hmm.
and it doesn't seem to be just kind of lip service, you know?
Right.
They've taken some real concrete steps to try to reduce their impact on the environment, like replacing, I think it was over 1,350 diesel generators with inverters in the last couple of years.
Wow.
They're also doing things like promoting financial literacy. They're
Mm-hmm.
supporting rural development, sponsoring healthcare initiatives,
Okay.
and even things like offering green deposits, which encourage people to invest in environmentally friendly projects.
So it's interesting that they're not just focusing on the E in ESG, right? The environmental, but also the S, the social impact. We talked about their efforts with financial inclusion, but what else are they doing to kind of address these social concerns?
Well, just their focus on the RAM segment itself has a really strong social component.
Right.
You know, supporting these small businesses, supporting the agriculture sector, that contributes to job creation, right? Economic growth in those rural areas,
Right.
which is really, really important for social development in India.
So they're walking the walk when it comes to ESG, not just talking about it.
Right.
But let's be practical for a second.
Okay.
ESG is great, but it also needs to make financial sense.
Right.
So how are these initiatives impacting their bottom line?
Well, that's a really good question.
Yeah.
It's tough to exactly quantify, the direct impact.
Right.
But there's more and more evidence coming out that shows that, companies that have a really strong ESG performance, they tend to be more resilient,
Right.
more sustainable in the long run.
So investors are looking for companies that are not just profitable, but they're also, doing good for the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. So it seems like Indian Bank is kind of checking both of those boxes. But
Mhm.
there's one more piece of this puzzle that we need to look at before we wrap up this deep dive. And that's their digital transformation strategy.
Right.
We touched on it briefly earlier,
Yeah.
but let's dig a little bit deeper.
Okay.
What are they doing to really enhance the customer experience and expand their reach using technology?
This is an area where they're really doing some amazing things. They've made some big investments in building out a really, really strong digital banking platform.
Right.
They're seeing some impressive results, too.
Mm.
Their presentation shows that their mobile banking users have increased by 20% year on year.
Wow.
They're now at 18.1 million users.
That's a lot of users.
It is. It's a lot. And their UPI transactions, the mobile payment system in India,
Right.
those have jumped by 10% compared to last year.
So they're not messing around.
No, they're not.
But it's not just about offering basic transactions online, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the more innovative things that they're doing in this digital space?
Well, they're going way beyond just basic banking. They're offering features like, for example, UPI Circle for delegated payments,
Okay.
which basically means you can authorize someone else to make payments on your behalf.
Interesting.
So, if you've got maybe like older parents or someone who isn't so comfortable using technology,
Right.
they can help them out with that.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And they're enabling, interoperable cash deposits through their business correspondent network.
Okay.
So it's easier for people, especially in those more remote areas,
Mm.
to access banking services.
So they're not just taking what they were doing before and putting it online.
No.
They're really using this technology to reach new customers, offer new things.
Exactly.
But this technology landscape's always changing.
Constantly. Yeah.
How are they staying ahead of the curve? How are they making sure that they're not falling behind?
Well, one of the things they're doing that's really smart is they're being really open to collaboration.
Okay.
They're partnering with all these different fintech companies, over 136 of them,
Wow.
to provide specialized solutions and really enhance what they can offer digitally.
So they're not trying to do everything themselves.
No, which is smart,
Mhm.
because that way they can get access to the latest technology. They can kind of keep up with those customer needs without having to build it all in-house.
That makes sense. So by working with other companies, they can be more flexible, more adaptable.
Exactly.
But all this digitalization, that's got to be impacting their workforce as well.
Absolutely.
How are they managing that transition internally? Are they getting any pushback from employees who are maybe used to doing things the old way?
That's such a good point, because that's a part that often gets overlooked.
Right.
It's not just
Yeah.
about implementing the technology.
Right.
It's about bringing your employees along with you.
Exactly. So how are they doing that?
They've actually put a lot of resources into training and upskilling their workforce.
Okay.
helping them get up to speed on this new digital environment. They've also created new roles and departments that are specifically focused on digital banking innovation.
So they're investing in their employees.
Absolutely. Which shows that they're committed to, not just adopting the technology, but making sure that their employees can succeed in this new digital world.
So it sounds like they're doing all the right things. They've got strong financials. They're managing risk carefully.
Yeah.
They're committed to ESG, and they've got this forward-thinking digital strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But let's zoom out for a second.
All right.
What are some of the bigger external factors that could impact Indian Bank's success in the future?
Well, the elephant in the room is always going to be the overall health of the Indian economy.
Right.
While it's one of the fastest growing economies in the world right now, it's still not immune to, all the global headwinds.
Right.
Inflation,
Yeah.
interest rates, geopolitical issues. All of that can kind of have a ripple effect on the banking sector.
So they need to be paying attention.
Yeah, absolutely.
Keeping an eye on those macro trends,
Mm,
adjusting their strategies accordingly.
For sure.
Okay. What about competition?
Oh, yeah.
The Indian banking sector is pretty crowded.
Very competitive.
Are there
Yeah.
any specific competitors that they should be worried about?
I mean, there are definitely a few. They've got competition from both public and private sector banks, and then you've got all these new fintech companies coming in, shaking things up.
Right, yeah.
Some of the big players to watch are going to be HDFC Bank, ICICI Bank, and State Bank of India.
Right.
Those are all big, well-established banks.
Yeah.
Strong digital capabilities and a huge customer base.
So Indian banks got their work cut out for them.
They do.
But, competition can be a good thing too, right?
Absolutely.
Eh?
Keeps everyone on their toes.
Forces them to innovate, to improve.
Exactly.
Okay, so it sounds like so far they're up for the challenge.
It seems like it.
They're willing to adapt, they're innovating, they're taking risks.
Yeah.
But let's not forget about that human element that we talked about earlier.
Right.
We talked about their employees, but what about their customers? How are they using all this technology to make the customer experience better and build those relationships?
That is the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that is what we're going to be talking about in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we're back. And we're finally ready to tackle that last piece of the puzzle. Indian Bank's customer experience. In this whole digital world, it's not enough to just offer good products.
Right.
You have to make sure that your customers actually enjoy using them.
Absolutely. I mean, customer experience is becoming like the key thing that sets banks apart these days.
Yeah.
And it seems like Indian Bank really gets that. They're not just kind of throwing tech at the problem. They're really using it thoughtfully to improve every interaction that a customer has with the bank.
Okay, so can you give me some examples? How are they actually doing that?
Well, one big area where they've made a lot of progress is in personalizing that experience.
Yeah.
They're using all this data they collect to understand what customers prefer and then tailoring what they offer to those preferences. So, for example, their mobile app now makes personalized recommendations based on your spending patterns
Oh, interesting.
and what your financial goals are.
So instead of being bombarded with all these random offers, I'm actually getting stuff that's relevant to me.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a much smarter use of data.
Yeah, totally. What else are they doing to make banking more convenient for their customers?
Well, they've really streamlined a lot of their processes.
Okay.
So it's a lot easier to do things like open an account, apply for a loan, manage your investments. All of that can be done online now. They've also got things like video KYC now, which means you can verify your identity remotely.
Right.
You don't have to actually go into a branch.
That's great. Especially, in India where sometimes getting around can be a bit of a challenge.
Absolutely.
Okay, so those are great examples of how they're using tech to make things easier, more accessible, less time-consuming. But what about customer support? We all know how annoying it can be to wait on hold forever or get those automated responses. How are they handling that?
Well, they've put a lot of effort into building like an omni-channel customer support system.
Omnichannel.
Yeah. So basically you can reach them through all these different channels like phone, email, chat, social media. And the idea is that no matter how you choose to contact them, you should have a smooth experience.
So they're not forcing you to use one specific way of getting in touch.
No, exactly. They're meeting you where you are.
That's smart. But technology can only do so much, right?
Of course.
What about that human element? Are they doing anything to make sure their customers feel valued, appreciated?
Yeah, I mean, they've got several initiatives in place to build those relationships with customers.
Okay.
They've got these personalized onboarding programs for new customers. And they have dedicated relationship managers for their high-value clients.
So you feel like you're actually talking to a person who miss you.
Right, not just some random call center.
Uh,
And they do regular surveys to figure out how happy their customers are.
Okay.
And then they actually use that feedback to get better.
So they're listening
They are.
and actually doing something with that information.
Exactly. And that's super important for building trust, making customers feel like they want to stick around.
Absolutely.
But, we can't talk about all this digital stuff without mentioning the elephant in the room.
Security.
Security, exactly.
Because with all these digital transactions, how are they making sure that their customers' data is safe?
Right. And they are taking it very, very seriously.
Okay.
They've got, layers of security.
Okay.
Encryption, multi-factor authentication, fraud detection systems, you name it. And they do regular audits, check for vulnerabilities to try and stay ahead of those threats.
So it sounds like they're really doing everything they can to make sure this digital banking environment is secure, trustworthy.
They are.
Yeah.
But, let's kind of zoom out again and think about the future for a second.
Okay.
What are some of those big trends that could impact the banking industry in India going forward?
Yeah,
And how is Indian Bank getting ready for them?
that's a good question.
Well, one huge trend that we're seeing is this rise of open banking.
Open bank.
Yeah. It basically lets customers share their financial data with other companies, third-party providers.
Okay.
So that could lead to a much more innovative and competitive landscape.
Right.
You have all these new players coming in offering very specific services tailored to each person's needs.
So it gives customers more control.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Indian Bank is actually embracing this.
Oh, wow.
They're involved in developing the standards for open APIs. They see it as a way to collaborate with those fintech companies and really offer something new to their customers.
That's smart.
It is. By being proactive, by working with other companies, they can stay ahead of the game.
They can shape the future.
Exactly.
Okay, so another trend that we can't ignore is this growing interest in digital currencies, blockchain technology.
Right.
How do you see that playing out? How will that impact the banking sector?
It's still early days, I think.
Yeah.
But these technologies have the potential to totally change the way we think about money, financial transactions. I mean, we're already seeing central banks all over the world looking into launching their own digital currencies.
So it's becoming mainstream.
Absolutely.
It's not just this fringe thing anymore.
Nope.
Okay, so how is Indian Bank approaching this?
They're keeping a close eye on everything that's happening in the digital currency world,
Okay.
and they're looking into how they can use blockchain technology.
Yeah.
They understand that these things could have a big impact on their business,
Right.
so they're taking steps to get ready.
All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Indian Bank, it's pretty clear that they're not just going along with this digital transformation, they're actively shaping it.
Yeah.
They're embracing innovation, collaborating with partners, putting the customer at the center of everything.
They're a great example of how a traditional bank can not only survive, but really thrive in this modern financial world.
Yeah. And they're doing it all while sticking to those core values of financial inclusion and social responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pretty powerful combination, sets them apart. But the story doesn't end here.
No,
Things are always changing.
always.
The financial landscape never sits still, so Indian Bank's journey is far from over.
Yeah. I mean, the big question is, what's next?
Right. What's next?
How will they keep innovating, keep adapting as these new technologies emerge?
How will they meet those changing customer expectations?
That's what we'll all be watching.
Absolutely. Well, that concludes our deep dive into Indian Bank. Hopefully, this gave you a better understanding of how they're performing, their strategies, their vision for the future, and we encourage you to keep exploring this fascinating world of finance. Until next time.